Okay, welcome back. You came back for more. I'm so encouraged. What I'd like to do in this time is begin with a question and answer time. And I promise you that I will do my best to answer. I won't answer with a question. I know some of you, sometimes I do this. Do I really want to ask him? I mean, because he's going to say, how could you ask such a question? I won't, I promise. So if you've got a question, raise your hand, speak it out loudly. I'll repeat it so everybody gets to hear it. And we'll see how long we go with this before we launch into another message. But yes, ma'am. That's you. Great. So the question was about my older brother, the one that I said who for 30 years has said, no, I'm not interested. I'll give you a short answer now. I'm going to talk about that a lot more tomorrow. In the last session is a whole thing about family. So I wrote a book on how to witness to family called Bringing the Gospel Home. I've done a bunch of speaking about this evangelism, and what I found is that after I do something like what I just did, we have a question and answer time, and almost always the first or second question is about family. So I started hearing this as a trend, and I said, somebody needs to write this book about this. And I did a lot of research and wrote it and sent the manuscript in to the publisher. I was so excited that they gave me a contract. And then my family came to visit for Thanksgiving. It was so stressful that I said to my wife, I'm calling the publisher and telling them, burn the manuscript. They're driving me crazy. And she said, no, don't. It's a good book. It'll help people. So anyway, but it's very, very difficult. So your question was, how many times do I keep coming back? Right. Well, so what I decided to do with my older brother was to stop bringing it up and find out what he is interested in and try to talk to him about those things. And again, I'll tell a longer story about this tomorrow, but what I found out about my older brother is that he was really interested in history, and I never knew that. My brother had been reading presidential biographies for a decade, and I never even knew it. So I found out that that's what he was interested in, and I started talking to him about that. And then that opened up some doors. I'll share more tomorrow. So I chose to honor that and ask God to use other conversations, and that worked. He's still not a believer, and he's still not terribly interested, but we've gone further. The other thing is, with some people, now I haven't done this, I'm trying to remember, I've probably only done this once with one of my relatives, but I have recommended this to some people. With some, the follow-up, or maybe not immediately, but eventually is, why is this off limits to you? I wonder why this makes you so upset. I wonder if we can talk about this. We never talk about it. It's always off limits. But, it's something that's very, very important to me. I wonder if we can talk about things that are important to me. We always talk about things that are important to you. Now, that's very uncomfortable, and you need to find a way to word it. My wife tells me that I word too many of my questions with you. Why do you? Why do you? And she's right. So we need to figure out how to word it, because when you hear a question with you in it, it can feel attacking. But, so maybe it's, I just wonder, I'd really like to talk about this. I know that this is upsetting to you, but none of it's easy, though. But so there's two different approaches. So we will talk more about the dynamics of family tomorrow. So, yes, sir, in the back. Yeah, very good question. God. Yeah. I have to repeat it with that one. Do I have to repeat it twice? Oh, I was going to repeat it with this one. Okay. No, that's too much running. I get dizzy. So the question that I'm repeating for this mic, which I hope will work, I forgot the question. No. If God does the calling, which I believe he does, what is our role? Well, I'm not so sure we can exactly figure it all out. I think it's very, very important for us to remember that it's this dual process. And God does his part, and we do our part. And we do everything that we can to try to make it clear, to answer questions, to express love, to listen carefully. And the whole time we're praying, remembering that God is doing what only he can do. And every conversion is this intersection of absolutely miraculous things that God does and very seemingly human just interaction between people. I don't think we need to figure out the exact equation about how that works, because I think it varies. But there's always this supernatural process that God is doing, and that should give us boldness and confidence of, it's not totally up to me. I want to do the very best I can. There's several phrases where Paul talks about I wrestled, I endeavored. They taught and they tried to make things clear. So our task is to be as clear and as bold and as precise as we can be, knowing that God does the miraculous. So, over here, yes, ma'am. My story. If it's okay, I'm hoping to share that tomorrow morning during the sermon. Is that okay if we hold off for that? So, there, I see I lured them in, so they have to come back. Yes.
How do you evangelize differently to someone who knows little or nothing about Christianity compared to someone who knows Christianity but is falling away to the extent that they don't want to believe it?
Good. So the question is, it's two different approaches with somebody who knows very, very little about Christianity versus people who know a whole lot about it and maybe have believed it or embraced it to some extent, and now they've left it and fallen away. Yes, it's very, very different. So a short answer, I can only give a short answer, but for the people that don't know much about the gospel, what we want to do is we want to find common ground. We want to find where our Christian worldview and their non-Christian worldview has some point of commonality, and then use that as the starting point about where that leads you, okay? With the people who know the Christian faith and maybe they embraced it but left it or something, whatever, you want to do the opposite. You want to find uncommon ground. You want to try to talk about how your experience with the gospel is different than theirs. Because if their experience was yours, they wouldn't have left it, or they wouldn't have turned away from it. That's harder. It's much harder. So it's trying to articulate the difference the gospel has made in your life in a way that just doesn't sound to them like, oh yeah, I heard this a million times. So it takes a lot of preparation in our own minds and thinking of what difference does this gospel make? How is it making a difference? That raises another point. I think it's true for all evangelism, and no matter who we're talking to, but it's especially true for this group that you're talking about. Sometimes we emphasize that the gospel is true. Here's why I believe it. Here's what happened. Here's why it's reasonable to believe that God really exists, that Jesus really was who he said he was. It's true. Yes, absolutely. Other times we emphasize how the gospel is good. They're not in tension with each other, but it's a different aspect. This is how it's making me a different kind of person. This is how it's helping me in my marriage. This is how it helps me deal with my kids. This is how it helps me face uncertainties of life. This is why I'm glad that it's true. This is how I know that it's true. This is why I'm glad it's true, how it's making a difference in my life. And I don't think people hear that story too much. Now, please be careful. You don't want to oversell it. You don't want to say, and now I have no more problems. I've become the perfect husband. Just ask don't ask my wife. No. Yeah, see, that was supposed to be funnier. Okay. So you don't want to oversell it and say that, the gospel has made you this perfect person who never has any problems. Just the opposite. I think it's the gospel has enabled you to handle these problems in profound and life-changing ways. So we all need to have, that command Peter gave us, always be ready to give an answer for those who ask you for the hope that you have within you. So sometimes that's, okay, here are the reasons, here are the arguments. But sometimes it's, here's how it's helping us in our marriage, in our family. Here's how it's helping me handle grief or handle the loss of a job or something. Good stuff, good questions. Others? No? Oh, here we go. Oh, yes, thank you.
How would you answer your friend if they asked you, how can a good God send people to hell?
All right, the question is, how can you believe in God, or how can a good God send people to hell? Yes, very, very difficult question. So I don't think there's a very simple, short, little cliche answer. So what you want to determine, how sincere is the question? How angry are they? How upset are they? So you might need to kind of tone down some anger and some hostility, but assuming that it's a real genuine answer, a genuine question. So you want to ask them what they believe about the afterlife, heaven, hell, kind of like that dialogue I told you about in the dorm room. And so find out for them, what do they think happens to bad people, evil people? Does everybody go to heaven? How would you feel if Hitler was in heaven? Doesn't it seem to make sense that there would be some kind of place of punishment? Now, of course, they want to know about good people, but you want to at least try to understand, what do they believe about the afterlife and judgment and heaven and hell? Eventually, in your conversation, you want to talk about Jesus is the one who talked about hell more than anybody else in the Bible. He did. So I have to look to him. And so what you want to do is you want to get the heat of the question off of you and onto Jesus. He can handle it better. Is this helping? Am I okay? So it's a long conversation, and it might start with, would you really like to talk about this? I think it's an upsetting topic. And I would hope that all of us have some level of discomfort about it. I mean, the idea that God sends people to hell is very, very disturbing. Should be. Now, one of the places that I get to in my conversations with people about this, if it's a good conversation that can really be listening to each other, I want to get to the place. So there's three key places I want to get to. One is I try to point toward Jesus. He's the one who talked about hell a lot. Okay. Second thing is, I don't think God so much sends people to hell as he allows them to choose to go there. Now, that's a very difficult issue for people to grasp, but he allows people the consequence of their choice. If people say, I don't believe in God, or I don't care about God, or God's just not all that big a deal in my life, I just want to live my life apart from God, I don't want him to be a big deal in my life, God says, okay. But if you allow that to continue for all eternity, so that's the third piece of this. Carry that out for all eternity. So one is I want to point to Jesus. Second is I want to say God allows people to opt out. But if you say, I don't really want God to be a big part of my life, well, just extrapolate that for all eternity, and it's horrible. And there's a word for it, and the word is hell. That's what I think the Bible teaches about hell, and it makes it more reasonable in people's minds. Now, they still may not accept it, but what you've done is you've tried to remove the question from you're crazy for believing something ridiculous to, oh, maybe it's not quite so ridiculous. I'm trying to think of what would be, do you like to read? You do. I really like C.S. Lewis a lot. So he has some things in his book, Mere Christianity, that might be helpful. So now it's time for a commercial. I now do a whole lot of ministry with the C.S. Lewis Institute, and some of you are saying, gee, what's that? Maybe not. There you go. Okay, thank you. I won't do a big commercial for it. I really like the organization. Our tagline is discipleship of the heart and mind. We want to help Christians articulate, live, and defend the Christian faith thoughtfully. There are a lot of very thoughtful, intelligent people in our society, in our world, in big cities and other places, who think that Christianity is for stupid people. And so they don't even consider it. And so what we're trying to do is come up with some material and some discipleship material to help people thoughtfully express that it's a very rich and engaging faith. And C.S. Lewis exemplified that by being a brilliant literature professor at Oxford and then at Cambridge, and he tried to find ways to articulate the faith when he came to it. He was an atheist for much of his life, but then he came to faith, and then tried to find ways to express it in deeply engaging ways and in ways that just about anybody could understand. So if you're interested, check out our website, cslewisinstitute.org, and there's lots of good stuff there. End of commercial. So, I hope that was helpful. Yeah, there's a lot more I could say about it, but I hope you're taking away that the first thing you need to do is just kind of help people remove the question from that's just crazy to, well, wait a minute. Good. There's a question. The guy behind. Yes. Or was that your question?
Yeah.
It was? No. Okay. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Well, since we can't simply proclaim the gospel, how do we display that validity or plausibility?
Good. Well, I did not mean to say we can't proclaim the gospel. We really should. We really need to. We must. What I'm saying is we have to build a case for it. So what we want to do is talk about preliminary issues before we get to the starting point of the gospel. So again, if the A to Z is, the way I used it before was about where different people are at. But imagine the same scale of, so this is kind of what we're trying to communicate to people. So on this end is the gospel. There's a God, He created us, there's something inside of us that wants to get to know Him, but we've sinned and rebelled against Him, and He sent His Son to die for us, and if we trust in Him, we can know God in a deep and personal way for all eternity. That's the gospel. Good? Okay? But, so that's starting somewhere here. But way over here is, well, so how do we think about life? How do we think about anything? How do we think about our life in this? What are the things we should do? What are the things we shouldn't do? What are the values that we want to build into our lives? Which are the things we say no to? Why do we believe what we do about money and sex and marriage and life and jobs and a million other topics that we can talk about thinking from a Christian perspective that build plausibility so that when we get to the point of saying there's a God and we can know Him, people have come with us so that that makes sense. Is that close to your question? I think there's a million topics along from here to the starting point, and what we need to do is think about all of those topics where how does being a Christian make a difference in the kind of music you listen to, the kind of movies you go to, the kind of things you want to do with your life, the things you say no to, a million topics. So that's how you build plausibility. Great question. Anybody else? Yes, over here. And then you.
People who view Christianity or Christians as hypocrites, i.e. the issues of Catholic priests,
So the question is about that age-old, very, very difficult question about what about all the hypocrites? Why all you Christians are all hypocrites? I think this is the question that can be answered in a lot of different ways depending on the way the person asks the question. So it's a question that we really need to listen carefully and find out why they're asking it. Because there's a whole lot of different factors in it. For some people, they're asking this question and they're really, really angry. They're really, really, some of them have been hurt terribly by people who claim to be Christians or who were Christians, and there's just a whole lot of pain. And they don't need a philosophical religious answer. They need a friend. Other people are asking the question totally sarcastically, not very sincerely. It's just an attack, and you probably shouldn't even answer it at all. And then there's a million varieties, not a million, okay, a dozen varieties in between. So you need to do a good job of listening. I did try to address it in my book, Questioning Evangelism. I titled that chapter, If Jesus is So Great, Why Are Some of His Followers Such Jerks? The publisher wanted to know if that's really how I wanted to word it, and I said yes, and they let me. So I can't give a thorough answer, but part of it is you want to hear why they're asking the question. And there's probably a lot to their question that you would agree with. So the goal is to try to get on the same side of the question with them and look at the question here. Rather than visualize it's this wall between us, what about all the hypocrites in the church? And you're on this side and they're on this side. You want to somehow get on the same side with them and say, well, what you're saying, yeah, that is terrible. Yeah, that is bad. That is horrible. I agree with you. Now, what you want to try to do is, one piece is, very often people word the question like this. Why are all Christians hypocrites? Or why are there so many hypocrites in the church? Or why is the church full of hypocrites? And what you want to do is you want to say, all? Really? You think it's all? You think all Christians are hypocrites? Well, no, not all, but most. Okay, really most? You really think it's the majority? We're talking 67%, 78%? Well, okay. So you want to kind of tone it down. Okay, it's really not all. And then you want to say, their hypocrisy really is not in line with Christianity, is it? And you would agree with that, and they would agree with that. So they may be living a certain kind of life, but that's not what Christianity is supposed to be. That's not what Jesus taught. So you're trying to distance the gospel from their living it out. And it takes a lot of installments in the question, but you want to somehow have this posture of you agree with them that what they believe or what they're doing is bad, but it's different than what the gospel is. And then a crucial step you want to try to say is, you know what? Hypocrisy isn't the worst thing. There are worse things than hypocrisy, and I'm guilty of some of those things. You want to try to say our problem is not just hypocrisy, which, by the way, we all have to some extent, but our problem is sin. Our problem is rebellion against God. Our problem is a whole lot worse than hypocrisy. And the gospel is a solution for that. So, it's a longer process. So, someone here had a question, I think. Yes, and then you know, this is not how I thought this question and answer time was going to go. The question was, is if God is so good, why does he allow bad things to happen? All right, why not? Let's do this. I think this is the toughest question. And yet, it's one of the best opportunities for us to show people how compassionate we can be. So again, you want to find out why they're asking that question. Are they philosophical and they want to hear a philosophical answer? Well, then give it to them. But if they're not really being philosophical and you give them a philosophical answer, you'll sound like someone who's really cold and insensitive. If they have experienced really deep suffering in their life, then you want to empathize with them and hear about that and tell them that you care. Eventually, where you want to get, again, I wrote 2 chapters on this in my book, and there are lots and lots of chapters in books. So this is a question that we all need to wrestle with, and then wrestle with how we will answer it. I think the most important thing I could say is don't give a simple answer to this question, because it's very complex and it's difficult. But what I want to say to people is, I don't have a completely and totally satisfying answer about all of the evil in the world. I don't think we do. I don't think, even Christians, I don't think we do. But the answer that we have as Christians, I think, is better than a whole lot of other answers. So the Christian answer is there still are a whole lot of things we don't understand. But God has done something about evil. He sent his son to die for it. And God will one day totally eradicate evil when he sends his son again. But in the meantime, I draw people a chart. I draw a pie chart. And I say, I think we've got slivers of an answer, but we don't have the full chart. So part of the answer is God allows people to have a certain level of choice and freedom. And a certain sliver is there's a devil in the world who does terrible things. And another sliver is we're living in a fallen world where terrible things happen. And we've got these slivers, but still I got a big chunk of that pie chart that says, I don't know. But in the midst of that, knowing what Jesus has done to eradicate evil and that someday he will, gives me a greater sense of hope and strength in the midst of evil. I want to very quickly tell people, though, that I'm terribly bothered by evil as well. That was a real short answer to a very, very big question, but does it get you started at least? Good. Now you had a question, I think. The question was, what about those people who've never heard about Jesus or live in a part of the world where the gospel is not too available? How is God going to judge them? And is that really fair that he would condemn them to hell if they never had a decent chance to hear it? You guys are picking light, easy stuff for me, right? We're going to close in prayer now. And Bill, remember I said you have a sermon prepared for tomorrow? You're going to need it. Yeah, I think there's a flight home. Well, let me first say we are living in a time when there are really, really good answers to these kinds of questions, all the ones you've asked. We have a wealth of resources. So these questions you're asking are very, very good ones, but people have given a lot of good thought to it. So, of course, now you want to know, well, what books do you have? I really like Tim Keller's book, The Reason for God, and I think he's got a lot of good answers. He has some very, very good things about your question about evil and suffering, and he also has some very good things about your question about hell. So there's some really good stuff out there. I really like, for those of you who are very philosophical, there's a lot of books by William Lane Craig that are very, very good. Trying to think of some of my other favorites. If there's a ministry called Stand to Reason, and their website is str.org, and they have lots and lots of answers to this kind of stuff. William Lane Craig's website also has a lot of very, very helpful answers to this. His website is reasonablefaith.org, or it might be A Reasonable Faith. So there's good answers out there. The answer about those people who've never heard or who don't have even chance to hear. You've got to choose how long of an answer you want to give the person, depending on how much they're wrestling with it. So there's a very, very thorough, rigorous theological answer that you can give. I'm not going to give that all here now, and you could find it, I think, pretty easily. I'm not just trying to sell books, but I do have a whole section in my book, Questioning Evangelism, that addresses that very topic. So it kind of maps out a very, very thorough answer. But sometimes you can give a very, very short answer and find out just how much of an issue this is for people. So the very, very short answer is, I believe God judges people based on what they do know, not on what they don't know. Now, there's a whole ton behind that, but I think I can say that. And for some people, well, that's good enough. Now, I happen to think that God has given everybody on the face of the earth enough information that they are responsible to respond. I think that's what Romans 1 teaches. And that if they don't respond positively just to that limited amount of revelation, which is just seen by looking at nature and heaven, if they don't respond well to that, God doesn't need to give them more information. They've already kind of sealed their fate, so to speak. But I don't spell all of that out if this short answer is good enough. So here, there's a principle that has just come up with this. Oh, this is really going to make things messy, but here we go. There are answers to these questions that we can find. And they really are, they're not that hard to find. If you go searching a little bit, if you find some good authors that you happen to connect with, there's good stuff to read. So you get answers. That doesn't necessarily tell you exactly how you should go about answering it. In other words, you read this whole chapter about what about those who've never heard, and somebody asks the question, what about those who've never heard? And you say, sit down, and you dump the whole chapter on them. That may not be the best approach. So here's the illustration I like to use. I'm going to assume that you've all seen at one time in your life a recipe. I won't ask if you've ever followed one or how successful you were. But you all know, at least I hope, that a recipe has two parts, right? Top part is the list of ingredients, cup of sugar, cup of flour, etc. And then the bottom part is what you do with those ingredients, the procedure, right? Preheat the oven, mix these ingredients together, let them sit for a while. Good, okay. If all you had was the top part of the recipe, it's probably not going to develop into a cake if all you have is just the list of ingredients. You need preheat the oven, grease the pan, mix these two ingredients, let them marinate overnight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of apologetic material, you read and you find out the list of ingredients in your answer. You still need to wrestle with which ingredient do I need to deliver first? Which ingredient do I need to mix with another ingredient and let it marinate for a while? I think a lot of evangelism and a lot of apologetics is where we just take the whole list of ingredients and people don't know what we're talking about, or they feel overwhelmed by it. So the question about what about those who've never heard, it's got this whole big list of ingredients. But for some people, they may just need to chew on one or two pieces of that for a while. And it's best not to deliver the whole thing. Did I just confuse all of you, or how am I doing? I can't quite tell. Is that helpful or not? We'll find out tomorrow morning as to who comes back. Is that at least a starting point there? What I do think is, with all of these questions, there's the content of the question, the words people ask, and then there's the tone with which they ask it. And you need to listen carefully to the tone. Sometimes the tone is, I'm really bothered by this, and I wonder if someone can help me. That's very different than, what kind of an idiot are you to believe in that kind of, you're crazy. You got to address those issues in different ways. Okay. Did I see another hand? Or did I scare you all off? Yes. Okay, this is going to be a last one, and then we'll launch into another set of topics. But hold that for one thought. I forgot. When are we going till? Is it midnight? No. No. Believe me. No. 8 o'clock. Thank you. All right, good. Okay, so your question.
How do you best deal with someone who already has a religion or deal with a Christian? Like, how is Christianity framed?
Okay, so the question is, what about someone who already has a religion, another religion? And then the underlying question with that, or the associated question is, why is Christianity right and all these other ones are wrong? Okay, so that's two questions. Let's do the first one. What about people who of other substantial faiths? So they're Muslim or Buddhist or Jewish, right? Okay, so what you want to do is you want to find out from people who have experience in that specific kind of ministry. So if they're Jewish, learn from Jews for Jesus or Chosen People Ministries. If they're Muslim, go online and learn from the Crescent Project. And so you want to do a little homework and find out, because there's unique ways of addressing different religions, and you need to do a little bit of homework. Now that's kind of the top part of the recipe. One of the first steps on the bottom part is ask and listen. Find out what they believe. It's a great chance for you to learn about a new religion. Find out all sorts of things that you probably never knew about Judaism or Buddhism or Hinduism. And what you want to do is you want to say, I wonder if we could talk about our different faiths and learn from each other. That's the starting point. Okay. The uniqueness of Christianity mostly centers around the resurrection. Jesus is the only one who rose from the dead. He's the only one who paid for sins completely and totally, and then the resurrection validates it. So that's what makes Christianity different than other religions. I think that's probably all I can say in a short amount of time. Maybe if you want, we could talk some more about it afterwards. There's a lot of good stuff written on that topic. Probably the person who's dealt with it the most that you might, if you like to read, is Ravi Zacharias. Because he's from India and grew up in a very Hindu world and had to deal with how Hinduism and Christianity differ. So he'd be a good one on that particular issue. And they've got a whole, that's another great organization, Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, so it's rzim.org. They've got some really, really good things about how to answer these questions. Well, let's launch into, I think your programs say that this next session is called Tensions in Evangelism. Is that right? So this is building on what I said earlier, that I don't think evangelism is comfortable. So it's how to live with tensions in evangelism. And there are 4 that I think it's really important for us to live with. And you'll notice I'm not saying these are tensions we need to resolve or to alleviate. We need to live with them. They're the realities of being in this world but not of it, or being sent as ambassadors to enemy territory. There's a number of different ways of thinking about it. What I'd like to do is look at a passage in the book of Colossians and look at 4 tensions in evangelism, and it all comes up in verses 2 through 6 of Colossians 4. So take a look at that. By the way, let me warn you. I'm going to try to move through this, and then I'm going to have you do some work. This will really ensure that you don't come back tomorrow. No, sorry. But I want you to practice some stuff. So get ready that I'm going to have you doing some practicing. Once again, I remind you, we've locked the doors. You can't get out. So Colossians 4, 2 through 6. Paul writes, "Devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. And pray for us too, that God may open a door for our message, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Let me first put this in context. The book of Colossians is about the supremacy of Christ, about how Jesus isn't just another religious leader or just a person. He's God in the flesh. Colossians chapter 1 is some of the richest, most deep theological teaching about the deity of Christ. In him, all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form, Paul says. So chapter 1 is some of the loftiest things about the supremacy of Christ. And then chapter 2 is all of these wonderful things that are true about us if we are in Christ, if we've identified with him. Paul also says, in him we have obtained fullness. We have all the fullness of what it means to be a person. So chapter 1 is about the supremacy of Christ. Chapter 2 is how great our salvation is. And then chapter 3 turns the corner of here's how it starts making a difference in all sorts of areas of life. How it makes a difference in your own way of thinking about yourself, about your way of living, how you live and how you embrace certain values and say no to certain things. It starts making a difference in relationships around you. He starts in verse 12 of chapter 3 with how it starts making a difference with your relationship with other Christians. And then he looks at the family, husbands and wives, fathers and children, how it starts working itself out in the workplace. And now here, it's how it starts making a difference with those who are on the outside. Did you catch that? That was a quick overview of Colossians. And he starts by telling us to devote ourselves to prayer. So the first tension that I think we need to live with, maybe tension's not the right word, but it's this pairing of prayer and proclamation. It's talking to God about people and then talking to people about God. It's getting on our knees and making a list of non-believers in our lives and asking God to work in their life. And then it's going and talking to them. It's that intersection I talked about before of the supernatural and the natural, or the divine and the human. So we pray and we ask God to do what only he can do, the absolutely amazing supernatural. But then we open up our mouths and we ask questions and we talk and we give people a book to read and we point them to a website. And there's the whole human thing about proclamation. Notice he says to devote yourselves to prayer. That word means to remain steadfast. Don't give up. You know, there's a whole lot of parables and teachings that Jesus gave about prayer, and the point was, don't quit. Which must tell you something, right? It must be easy to quit. If there's one thing I know about prayer is it's easy to not do it. It's easy to quit. It's easy to lose heart. It's easy to think, is this making any difference? So we need to be devoted to it. Now, Paul gives us a couple of helps so that we don't quit. One is be watchful, and the second is to be thankful. Watchful. You pray, and then you watch to see how God is answering. And then when you see answers, you remember that. You write it down. You have a journal, and you make notes of how he's answered all of your prayers. Or he's in the process of answering them. Or at least he's answering a whole lot more than you thought. If you don't keep a written track, a written diary of it, it's very easy for you to think, he never answers any of my prayers. I have felt that way. And then I open up a journal and go, oh, I forgot I even prayed that. And that helps you to be devoted to prayer. So that's the prayer part. The proclamation, do you see it? I mean, there's lots of talking in this passage. God may open a door for our message that involves words. We may proclaim it, let your words be. So there is that tension of prayer and proclamation. By the way, I find it to be tremendously liberating not to try to figure out how this all works. God knows how it works. But there are, in many conversion stories, aspects that make no sense whatsoever. I've mentioned to you I did some research. I got to interview a young woman who is a senior in college. And she told me about how she became a Christian in her sophomore year. She was raised in a family with no religion whatsoever, zero, zip. She can't remember ever going to church. Her grandfather was a pastor, but her father rebelled against his father's religion, and became an atheist when he was in college. He married a woman who had no faith, and they raised their two daughters with no faith whatsoever. None, zero, zip. And so she said to me, she came away to college. She was an atheist. All her friends were atheists. Her first year, freshman year, she had no religious anything, whatever. She came home at the end of the first year, and her parents said, we're going to take a family vacation. We're going to go to London for 2 weeks. London. We saved up a bunch of money. This is probably our last chance to do a family vacation. We're going to go to London. So she's telling me this, and she says, and so I decided to pack my Bible. I said, excuse me, your what? My Bible. Sorry, you had a Bible? Yeah. Where did you get it? I don't know. It was kind of weird. I don't know. I mean, maybe like this friend of mine gave it to me when I was in elementary school. I don't know. Okay. All right. So you decided to pack your Bible on vacation. Yeah. Why? I don't know. Isn't that weird? Oh. All right. And then she says to me, she said, and it was like a really big fat one, you know? It was like one of those fat Bibles. And so I had to give up a lot of room in my suitcase because my dad said we had to pack really light. I mean, she's doing this. She said it was a really small suitcase and I had this big fat Bible. So, I mean, I don't know why I brought it. It was just kind of weird. I said, so did you read your Bible on vacation? Oh, yeah, every day. Why? I don't. So what did you think? I thought it was great. Really? I mean, I'm doing research and I'm thinking, I'm supposed to believe in this stuff. I was like, wow. So what did you read? Oh, I read Matthew and Mark and Romans and a bunch of Psalms. Really? On vacation? Yes. And so then what? Well, then I came back to school and I thought, I got to find out what this book's about. What do you mean? Well, I started finding out where the Bible studies on campus were, and I started going to one, and that's how I became a Christian. Now, you go and explain that to me. I don't know. I just love it. I love that story. Can I explain it? Okay, yeah, there's a sovereign God who works in amazing ways, but don't try to figure it all out. Pray, and then talk to people and see what God does. It's pretty wild. All right, so there's the first tension. Second one is a tension of words and deeds. Okay, there's lots in this passage about words, right? Our message, proclaim, let your speech be full of grace. So there's lots of words, but then there's also be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. So the way you act makes a very big difference. Your words and deeds need to be in line with each other. So we need some people in our lives who know us well enough who can say when our deeds are not consistent with the gospel. And we need to constantly be asking, am I speaking and telling people why I act the way I do? You could play with this a little different. You think, okay, what would it be like if it's all words and no deeds? Well, they would kind of ring hollow. I mean, if it's all words and you're living like a selfish person who doesn't really care about people, then all of your talk about the love of God seems kind of hollow. On the other hand, if it's all deeds and you never get around to attaching the gospel to it, they'll never figure out that that's why you're acting like this. You may have heard this cliche. I've seen it on T-shirts. People say, preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use words. Have you seen this? Some people say it was said by Francis of Assisi. I've done some research. I don't think Francis ever said that. In fact, we have some historical documents that Francis was this very, very bold and loud evangelist. We have people who complained about how loud he was. I find that encouraging. But whether Francis said it or not, I don't think we should believe it. It's always necessary to use words. They'll never connect our actions to the gospel. Here, let me play this out for you. You have brand new neighbors, they move in, and you want to welcome them to the neighborhood, so you bring them a plate of chocolate chip cookies. Very nice thing to do, great idea. Here's what will not happen. They will not say after you leave, I know why they brought us these chocolate chip cookies. These people must realize that there's a holy, righteous God, but they have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And there's a great gap that separates them. But God in his mercy and his sovereignty sent his son. He took on flesh and he died an atoning death, a propitiation. And he rose from the dead to validate. They won't do that. They will not, no matter how good the chocolate chip cookies are. hear me carefully. I'm not saying insert tracts in between the chocolate chip cookies. It's not what I'm saying. Sooner or later, you need to attach words to that deed because they won't attach the words of the gospel. So we need both. Okay, words and deeds. Third tension, salt and grace. Let your words be full of grace, seasoned with salt. The grace part of words, I think we get. Our message should sound like good news. It should be gracious. People should hear the fact that there's a God who loves people. There's a God who draws people. There's a God who is the ultimate source of what we're looking for. So there's good news in our proclamation of the gospel. There's words about forgiveness for sin, of deliverance and liberation. So we need to find all these kind of good ways of saying it. But there also needs to be salt, and there needs to be something that makes people thirsty for more. We need to be willing to think about how to say things in a way that intrigue people, that perhaps bother people, that make them want to say, wait, what did you just say there? So that's the problem with cliches about the gospel that don't really have any salt or flavor to them. An example of this, I've heard a number of times of Tim Keller saying this. He's a pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City in Manhattan. He interacts with lots of very, very successful and sophisticated secular people. And quite often, a regular question he gets is, well, you're not one of those Christians who believes in hell, do you? This might touch on some of your questions. You're not one of those Christians who believes in all that stuff about fire, right? Fire and brimstone and burning and all that kind of stuff. And he's come up with this way of responding. He says, well, I think the stuff in the Bible about fire in hell it's kind of a metaphor. And people go, oh, good, you're not one of those crazy literalists. Thank you. And then he says, and I think it's a metaphor for something far worse than fire. Now, you may not agree with all of that, but you got to admit, it does kind of, wait a minute, what are you talking about? I think the fire image is nowhere near as horrible as the fact that people spend eternity completely and totally separated from the God who created them. That's horrible. That's far worse than fire. So we need to find a way that has grace and salt, a good flavor to it, and also an intriguing salt that makes them thirst for more. All right, one more pair in here. So prayer and proclamation, words and deeds, grace and salt. The other one is, it's not totally in this passage, but it's in this book, and it's all throughout the New Testament. It's the pairing of reception and rejection. The reception is talked about, well, it's implied because we have a book of Colossians, which means there must have been a church there. People must have responded, otherwise they wouldn't have had a letter written to them. But we actually are told in chapter 1 that Paul says, in verse 7, you learned about this gospel from Epaphras, our dear fellow servant, who is a faithful minister of Christ on our behalf, and who also told us of your love in the Spirit. So he's recounting the fact that the word, the gospel, came to this city and people responded. So there it is, reception. But then, you'll remember in this passage that I read, he says that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. That's the rejection. Sometimes the gospel gets received and they write you wonderful letters about how much they appreciate you. Sometimes the gospel gets you arrested and thrown in jail. We've talked about this a bunch already, so I won't elaborate too much more. You may use the exact same illustration, the explanation, the statement that gets some people so excited they want to hear more. And you may use the exact same thing and other people just glaze over and they don't know what you're talking about, or worse. So, what we need to do is be ready for however they respond. Let me read you a note from a college student who describes his religious beliefs, because I think there are a lot of people who are like this. But give me a moment, please. These are words written by a 17-year-old college freshman who was asked by a friend of his what his religious beliefs are. He wrote, "You ask me my religious views. You know, I think that I believe in no religion. There is absolutely no proof for any of them, and from a philosophical standpoint, Christianity is not even the best. All religions, that is, all mythologies, if you want to give them their proper name, are merely man's own invention. Primitive man found himself surrounded by all sorts of terrible things that he didn't understand, thunder, pestilence, snakes, etc. Well, what more natural than to suppose that these were animated by evil spirits trying to torture him? And these he kept off by cringing to them, singing songs, and making sacrifices. Gradually, from being mere nature spirits, these supposed beings were elevated into more elaborate ideas, such as the old gods. And when man became more refined, he pretended that these spirits were also more refined. Thus, religion, that is to say, mythology, grew up." Of course, mind you, I'm not laying down as certainty that there's nothing outside the material world. Considering all the discoveries that are always being made, that would be foolish. Whenever any new light can be got about such matters, I will be glad to welcome them. In the meantime, I'm not going to go back to the bondage of believing in any old and already decaying superstition. Now, I write that because I think that there are more and more people in our world who could say that. Maybe not quite so clearly. But you may have heard that the people who say they have no religion whatsoever is a group of people in our society that's increasing dramatically. People talk about the rise of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They have no religion. And there's more and more of your friends and neighbors who would say exactly that. Now, here's the good news about that. You know who wrote those things? C.S. Lewis. Yeah, the guy I was telling you about earlier. C.S. Lewis, who then became a Christian and then became one of the greatest evangelists and apologists of the 20th century. People say his book, Mere Christianity, was probably the most influential evangelistic book of the 20th century, maybe of all time, other than the Bible. C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, that millions of people have read all around the world, see his movies. That C.S. Lewis was this wise guy who said, well, I have no religion at all. But people kept talking to him. J.R.R. Tolkien told him about how to think about God. And very, very intelligent people said that, no, there's far more to it than what you think. So that same C.S. Lewis, years later, wrote about his own conversion in his book, Surprised by Joy. He said, "You must picture me alone in that room in Magdalen College night after night, feeling whenever my mind lifted, even for a second from my work, the steady, unrelenting approach of him whom I so earnestly desired not to meet. That which I greatly feared had at last come upon me. In the Trinity term of 1929, I gave in and admitted that God was God and knelt and prayed, perhaps that night the most dejected and reluctant convert in all of England. I did not then see what is now the most shining and obvious thing, the divine humility which will accept a convert even on such terms. The prodigal son, at least, walked home on his own 2 feet. But who can duly adore that love which will open the high gates to a prodigal who is brought in kicking, struggling, and resentful, and darting his eyes in every direction for a chance to escape? The hardness of God is kinder than the softness of men, and his compulsion is our liberation." Isn't that wonderful? So your friends that you were talking about and the people that you wrote down who you might think there's not a chance in the world, look at what God can do. I'm sure you all remember there was a guy who was riding his donkey one day on the road to Damascus, and God knocked him off and converted him, and he changed the course of history in some ways. You know what I'm talking about, right, Paul? So we need to keep being devoted to prayer and being watchful and thankful and see what God can do. Amen? Amen. You're not ready to leave, don't worry. That sounded like we're done, but I want us to do a little exercise which will warm us up for some more things we're going to do tomorrow. I want us to work on a kind of a basic listening exercise. Everything that I've been saying has implied that we're good at listening. Here's what I have found. Most of us are not as good at listening as we think we are. In fact, most of us are not as good at a lot of things that we think we're good at. My youngest son is studying social psychology. There's this prevailing trend in social psychology. They call it the Lake Wobegon effect. Maybe some of you remember about Lake Wobegon, where all the children are above average. The vast majority of Americans believe they are above average, which, if you play with that for a while, you realize that can't work. So a very, very high percentage of us believe we are above average in driving skills. That can't, never mind, you see how that works. 90% of high school football players believe they are in the 90th percentile of football skills. It's rather, anyway, so some of you won't get, okay. So I think listening is far more difficult than we think it is. And it's constantly something that we need to improve at. So I want us to spend a little time doing some listening exercises. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to pair up, but it's got to be someone that you're not related to. That means spouses, and okay? And it's even better if it's someone you don't really know all that well. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes and 12 seconds to pair up with someone I recommend of the same sex, but you can, okay? And pair up, introduce yourselves, and move to where you can talk to them. Ready, go. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Okay. Who does not have a partner? Anybody not? Everybody's good? All right, good, good, good. Okay, so first thing is, we need to learn about nonverbal communication. Right now, without saying a word, I want you to both decide who's going to be partner A and who's going to be partner B. Ready, go. Hip, no talking. That's a lot more verbal for nonverbal. Okay, so you all know somebody's A and somebody's B. This is not that funny. There's been a lot of laughter so far. Huh. I don't know how this happened. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a listening exercise. And the way this works is partner A is going to start talking about anything. Don't make it really heavy. Okay, this is not psychotherapy practice. So partner A does not say, I've never really understood my parents. Don't do that. Not today. So, okay, this is just pick a light topic and just talk for just a little bit, a minute maybe. Then partner B responds with a question. I want to quickly add, it should be a question related to what partner A has just said. I did this somewhere, and I said, so partner A talks and partner B asks a question. Partner A talks a little more, partner B asks a question. That's the way it's going. So partner B can only ask questions. Somebody raised their hand and said, does the question have to relate to what they talked about? Yeah, that would be best. So, okay, so A talks, B asks a question. A talks, B asks a question. Let me say something to partner B. You're going to be tempted, you really are, to chime in with, yeah, me too, and then tell your story. Don't do it. Or you're going to be tempted to go, oh yeah, and let me top that and tell. So partner A says, on the way here I got stuck in a lot of traffic. And partner B says, oh, I was in 4 hours of traffic. Don't do that. So A talks and B asks questions. A talks, B asks questions. B can only respond with questions, and I'll interrupt us in a few minutes. So you ready? Go. Okay, here's the principle that I want you to see. A lot of times, dialogues are not really dialogues. They're not people talking to each other. They're simultaneous monologues. This person talks, and this person's just waiting until you stop so they can do their thing. And then this is not a really good dialogue. It's not a good conversation. And so it certainly does not make for very good evangelism. Because when you're doing this, what you're really saying is, I don't really care about what you're talking about. I want to tell my story. So what you want to do is you want to become good at keeping the attention on them and letting them keep telling their story. Asking a question is a very good way to do it. It's not the only way. So sometimes making a comment keeps the spotlight on them. So they talk about they are on the swim team and they have to wake up really early in the morning. So you could ask questions about that, or you could say, wow, that takes a lot of commitment, doesn't it? Well, I guess that's a question. That takes a lot of commitment. But you see, what you're doing is you're still keeping it there, rather than the conversation being a tug of war back and forth. So what we want to do is we want to become good listeners and good conversation partners so that we can honor them and keep it there. Now, the time will come for it to come back to you. It's not always there, but we tend to want to have it on us. By the way, I've said this a number of times, and people have told me, no, that's not really true for everybody. So most, or maybe a lot of us, like to pull it back to us. Some people are very happy with always keeping it there because they don't ever want to talk about themselves at all. Well, that doesn't help for evangelism either. So if you're very uncomfortable talking about yourself, then the area of growth where you need God, where you want to ask God to work in your life, help me to feel confident in you that I'm okay about, well, let me tell you about me a little bit. So you have to decide, where do I need, am I a person who tends to pull the conversation to me and hog the conversation? Then I need to grow in the area of, let me keep it focused here. Let me ask questions. Let me make comments that keeps the arrow pointed in your direction. But others of us may feel like, oh no, I don't ever want to talk at all. Well, then you need to find out, well, you need to become fluent in statements of, well, maybe I could tell you a little bit about me. Or, well, you know, you just said that reminds me of something. I wonder if I could tell you about what I think. And that may be the bigger stretch. How's that working? So let's go back to the original pairing. So A is going to talk and B is going to ask questions. But here's the thing. There are different kinds of questions. Some questions are only information questions. So it goes like this. Partner A says, on my way here, I got stuck in a lot of traffic. By the way, does that ever happen around here? No? No. See, I'm from Northern Virginia, where someone says, I got stuck in traffic. They said, what do you say? It means you were breathing. Of course you're in traffic. We're always in traffic. There's always traffic. Anyway, so it's not really much of a conversation. But for an illustration, so this person says, I was stuck in a lot of traffic. So an information question can be, oh, where were you coming from? What road were you on? How long did it take you? What time did you leave? What time? You got it? Okay, that's all information. And that's good. Yeah. There's another set of questions that are more personal, emotional. How did you handle that? How did you feel? How do you usually handle it? Does that really bother you, or do you handle that pretty well? You get it? These are the questions that men find particularly difficult to say. I said that out loud, I know, and some of you now are really upset. But that would be in touch with emotions, and that might take you several hours. I can say that because for me, sometimes, you know, my wife sometimes will ask me how I felt about something. And I went, I don't know, how long do you have? I mean, there was one time we were coming home from a party and she said, did you have a good time? And I thought, I don't know. How would I know that? I said, well, was it fun? Fun, that's like an emotion. So some of us have to work at this more than others. So you ready? So A says something. B asks some questions, but try to see if you can move it into the not just information category. Does that make sense? Ready, go. Well, I hope this has been helpful, and I hope that it's not just in really close personal conversations, but it actually will pave the way for evangelistic conversations with people that you don't know so well. I think that there are a lot of people in our world who are starving for someone who will actually care about them and listen to them. And that may be one of the most powerful lead-ins, building plausibility for our gospel message, that God cares for them. So may God use this in powerful ways. Let's close in prayer, and tomorrow, well, you all know, our next session just about evangelism is in between the services, is that right? Here's what I do know is that the first service starts at 8 o'clock in the morning. Lord have mercy. Great. And in the afternoon one is going to focus about family for the most part. So let me pray for us, and it's been great to be with you. Lord, we ask again that you would work in our hearts to give us wisdom, compassion, and boldness. May the gospel be our strength. May it be so amazing to us that you accept us because of your grace and your mercy and what you did on the cross. And may that make us more bold, more compassionate, more caring for lost people. We pray this in our Savior's name. Amen. It's been great to be with you. See you guys in the morning.